Okay. How about now? Is the audio available now? I think that should have fixed it. Alrighty. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start today's webinar, which is titled From Diet to Disease, Ultra-Processed Food and Chronic Illnesses. And so today's webinar is basically, we're going to be talking about a few things. Number one is we're going to try to define what ultra-processed foods are, right? Then we're going to take a little deep dive into the ultra-processed food, the industry, what exactly is ultra-processed food, right? And what are the steps involved in ultra-processed foods, and the prevalence of ultra-processed food, how they're linked to chronic illnesses. We're going to be talking about that. And lastly, we're going to be talking about the solutions of how we can reduce the burden of chronic of these ultra-processed foods in our diet and why it's important to do so. Okay, so initially, so let's start with a little bit of history, right? So there's been a number of population studies done comparing indigenous populations with modern populations. And why are those important? Primarily because they were done initially because as Western diets and Western people moved across the world, they noticed one thing of very sorry. One thing was very clear, that all these indigenous populations had very little non-communicable diseases, right? Very little evidence of diseases such as hypertension, such as obesity, such as heart disease. Rarely ever anybody died of heart attacks and strokes. So first, let's talk about these studies done in East Africa, in parts of Tanzania and Kenya, which is the Maasai people, right? These people, their diet consisted entirely of milk, meat, and blood, right? That's what and this is what they look like. They were all lean. They were all healthy. They had excellent teeth. They had excellent skin. There was no chronic illnesses at all, right? And this is done in the 1960s and the 70s. Their diet consisted of about 3,000 kilocalories, 66% of which was animal fat, and which is entirely saturated fat, right? That's important to know, right? Because we're told saturated fat is the root of all evil. It's linked to heart disease, etc. But what do we find here? 3,000 kilocalorie diet, 66% animal fat, saturated fat, 17% carbohydrate, right? And this is in the 70s. The population had zero heart disease and any evidence of any chronic illnesses. Then let's move across the globe to the South Pacific Ocean, to the people of Tokelau. These are another indigenous people living between somewhere Hawaii and New Zealand, these 2 or 3 group of islands, the Tokelau. Their diet is somewhat different. Their diet was entirely consisted of coconuts, starchy tubers, fruit, and a little bit of fish, right? So their diet was 53% fat. Almost majority of that, 45%, was saturated fat. And they were studied in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And again, there virtually no heart disease, obesity, or diabetes. And the group that was studied is males aged between 40 and 69. Again, virtually no chronic illnesses. Then we come across the Tukasenta people in Papua New Guinea. These were studied in the 1960s, right? This is before all these studies, what I mentioned, are before any advent in these societies of any sort of Western diet, any sort of processed foods. So this was just their indigenous, what they ate, what they grew, what they killed, however they were eating indigenously. So these were studies done in the 1960s. Their diet, interestingly, consisted of 94% carbohydrate, almost. So one of the things that they grow that are endemic in that area is sweet potatoes. So their diet consisted entirely of different species of sweet potatoes. 94% carbohydrates, 3% protein, and majority of that diet, as I mentioned, was made of sweet potatoes. Again, what was what did they find? absence of obesity and hypertension. No diabetes or gout was found. Ischemic heart disease was rare, if not completely absent. Right? So these are three indigenous populations from completely different parts of the world. Right? Um, before the advent of any processed food, before the advent of any refined sugars, any refined flours, etc., eating an indigenous food. Right? So here we have evidence about, when we talk about traditional foods and traditional diets and how they differ from today. So where are we today? So this is where we are today, right? And this is across the world. It's the same picture. What's rampant, right? What's changed? Traditionally or historically, for thousands of years, people most often or majority of the people died from infectious diseases, right? So whether that be TB or pneumonia or skin infections or whatever that may be, it was usually some sort of infectious disease which would be the cause of death for majority of the population, right? But in the last 100 to 200 years or 100 years, it has flipped, right? Majority of the people now die from non-communicable diseases, from chronic diseases. So what do we hear? Mostly people dying of heart disease. Mostly people are dying of strokes. Mostly people dying of cancers. Very few people now die from non-communicable diseases worldwide, right? Oh, sorry, die of infectious diseases worldwide. Majority of the people are dying from these chronic illnesses or as a result of them. And so let's start with the definition. So of ultra processed food. Now, this is a very complete and very complete definition. It's a mouthful, but we'll go through it in detail. So, industrial food or industrial formulations, typically with five or more, and usually many ingredients usually many ingredients. Besides salt, sugar, oils, and fats, ingredients of ultra processed foods include food substances. This is important, not commonly used in culinary preparations, such as hydrolyzed proteins, modified starches, hydrogenated or interesterified oils, and additives whose purpose is to imitate sensorial qualities of unprocessed or minimally processed foods and their culinary preparations to disguise undesirable qualities of the final product, such as the use of colorants, flavorings, sweeteners, emulsifiers, humectants, sequestrants, firming, bulking, defoaming, anti-caking, glazing agents. What are those? We'll go in detail. But as you can see, the definition is quite a complete definition, and we'll go through it one by one, right? So another concept that developed through relatively recently is the concept of nutritionism, right? And the concept of nutritionism um, can be summarized as in this picture, right? So we see a natural food or a food preparation. Nutritionism believes the idea of nutritionism believes that foods are healthy or they give us health because of the nutrients that they contain in them. Therefore, if we can take apart the dish that's on the left hand side and take it in a lab, break it down to its components, the proteins, the fats, the carbohydrates, the vitamins and minerals, and if we can put them together in a different form, such as a shake, such as a drink, such as a bar, such as a powder, or such as a pill, then if that can come, those nutrients can come in that form, as long as we're getting the nutrients in, we're going to get health along with it, right? So that's the concept of nutritionism, that that different foods provide health because of the nutrients that they contain, right? Um, and which is why we have things like this, right? Very Soylent is a heavily marketed, quote unquote, state of the art drink that supposed to replace food, right? It's supposed to people can don't have to waste time in food preparation and all that goes into food, and just mix this in water because it has all the things. It has all the carbohydrates it needs, the fats, the proteins, the vitamins and the minerals, and you can see that there. And if we drink this, we're going to have optimal health, and that is the claim that they make, right? Because this is a part of a healthy diet, right? To function optimally, humans are better if they eat this, right? So that's the claim nutritionism makes. But we know that natural foods are more than just nutrients, right? Foods have many hundreds of bioactive compounds, right? And of the known macronutrients and the micronutrients that we know, there's about 67 of them. But foods also contain thousands of chemical compounds with and the 500 of which, or 500 or so, that we know have therapeutic effects, such as flavonoids and luteolins and saponins. Now, these chemicals aren't really the processed food industry doesn't really care about, because A, they're not studied that much. B, they don't have that much data. C, that they're in such small quantities that whether they're there or not there, it doesn't really affect the flavor or the taste, right? But we know from studies that they do have a therapeutic effect. Now, the amazing thing is, when foods are prepared, when foods are cooked, these ingredients have a synergistic and some have an antagonistic effect. Right, so certain foods can't be prepared with certain foods, other kinds. Certain ingredients can be mixed to produce even a more powerful therapeutic effect. Right, these are all the benefits that the nutritionism cannot take into account for. Okay. The other thing, food is, there's many aspects of many dimensions of food, right? So how we source food, where do we get our vegetables from? Where do we get our fruits from? Fruits from? Where do we get our animals from? Our meat from? How's that food prepared? What goes inside? What goes in the food preparation? Who's involved in the food preparation? What are the different methods of food preparation? Right, and not only that, how are we consuming that food, right? Are we consuming it by ourselves? Are we consuming it with family members? Are we consuming it with friends? That has an impact on our health as well. So all these different dimensions of food that are completely lost, right? And so what we see is, there's a big difference between the way food was eaten and consumed traditionally versus food that's made, prepared, and consumed in nowadays, right? So, first of all foods are more than just nutrients, right? So on the left we have just tomatoes, but if we break them down into just nutrients, then those can be had from a can of diced tomatoes, right? Because that's what's needed to prepare certain food, right? And then different foods come together to form dishes. Similarly, different nutrients can come together to prepare these said dishes, such as the one on the right: Coca-Cola, Soylent, burgers, etc. Right? Then there's the aspect of behavior, right? How are we eating those food? Are we eating, we preparing them together and eating them together, or is it just like we're driving by in ourselves, picking the food up, and then eating it by ourselves, right? So that is the dichotomy that exists between the way food was thought of. Food was traditionally the the whole thinking around food versus the whole thinking about food currently. Okay, so let's go back to food processing, right? So natural foods exist. The example of natural foods are meats, vegetables, fruits, nuts. These are all natural foods. But there is a certain degree of processing involved if we have to consume them, right? That's just normal. And humans have been doing it for thousands of years, right? Putting salt on it, salting, just merely washing them, drying if they're wet, curing meats, or heating the food to prepare different dishes and meals. That's referred to as minimally processing, right? So food without processing is very difficult to eat, right? So there always has to be a certain degree of processing that goes into foods to make them or prepare them or get them ready to eat. But that's what food had historically been done, minimally processed, in the form of, say, preparing cheeses or vinegar or pickling, right? But what has happened now is the ultra processing of food, right? And as you can see, you take that minimally processed food and then you turn it into ultra processed food by these processes such as coloring, sweetening, emulsification, fattening, homogenization. Now, what jumps out at us about these processes, none of those processes can occur in a kitchen, right? You need factories and industries for emulsification. You need chemicals and stuff for decaking or caking or fattening and homogenizing, right? These So those are some of the aspects of ultra processing food, right? Um, because ultra processing always involves uh, 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 things that are not found in the kitchen, right? They're done in factories, and it's a very new phenomenon. It's only been going on for about 100 years or less, right? And the primary aim of ultra processed food is to produce food that is very cheap, because that whole industry of ultra processed food came out from it started when there was food was scarce, so food had to be created very cheap, and it had to be stored for a very long time and transported over a great distance. That's the primary aim or aims of the processing food industry, or food when it's processed, of food when it's created by industry, right? But and the purpose of that purpose is to replace real food, right? Is to and the examples are in front of us, like breakfast cereals, right? Boxed lunches, frozen dinners, right? You can store them. You can store them forever. You can store them for years. You can transport them from here to around the world, and they're going to taste the same. And that's the claim that ultra processed foods tend make, that the taste is exactly the same, whether you're eating it here, a McDonald's sandwich here, or whether you're eating a McDonald's sandwich halfway across the world. There and they take great effort, and they spend a lot of money just for that purpose, right? Okay, so as I said, the ultra processing involves replacement of real food, right? So oranges are replaced by drinks such as that. Water is replaced by energy drinks and other hydration drinks. Um, Regular beverages are replaced by Coca-Cola, etc. These are just some of the examples of ultra processed foods where they're replacing commonly found foods, which are naturally occurring foods. So now let's talk about the steps involved in ultra processing. Okay, so the number one and the most important step in the ultra processing is what we talked about before, is nutritionism, and that means it extraction of the oils, the fats, the sugar in down to its core. Right, so they extract the oils, the fats, the sugars, then they chemically modify it, right? Whether it's hydrogenation, whether it's coloring for whatever reason, right? Then they put them back together in the most palatable form. So what they'll do is, like, they'll concentrate the fats and they'll concentrate the sugar, right? And if it's not enough, they'll add more sugar by sweeteners. And if it's not, and if it needs more texture, they'll add more oils and more fats, right? Then usually what happens is, when you take the food, natural foods apart from their, as I mentioned, naturally occurring flavonoids, naturally occurring fiber, naturally occurring fats, what you end up is usually stuff that just looks pretty disgusting, and usually has a pretty bad smell to it, which is why there's a heavy use of cosmetic additives, which comes in the form of different artificial flavors, different colors, emulsifiers. And lastly, the step includes, which is also a very important step for them, is that sophisticated packaging, right? These companies spend billions of dollars just in the research and development of very sophisticated packaging that will last the test of time, b last the distance it needs to travel, and c it's appealing, that when you open it or when you buy it from that you can spot it, that you can identify it from a very far away, that oh, my Oreo cookies are over there. Oh, the Lay's chips are over there. Oh, that bottle of Coke is over there. So you don't have to do much effort in identifying these products, right? So, um, again, let's talk. Here we have examples of some ultra processed foods and their ingredients, right? Natural food will never, ever, ever come with a ingredient list, right? So if you buy meat, does it ever come with, say, I don't know, the ingredients in meat? No. Similarly with yogurt or milk or vegetables, right? They never ever have an ingredient list. But ultra processed foods are always going to have an ingredient list that is more than 5 long, right? More than 5 things are going to be in it. Always, always. Okay. Again, you'll find, and the most important aspect of these things are the ingredient list are going to have things that you're never going to find in the kitchen, such as hydrogenated fat, or zinc oxide, or as we can, the calcium lactate, or um, the sodium cyclinate and stuff like that, right? These are not things that are readily available in any kitchen unless your kitchen is a chemistry lab, right? So the other thing that the ultra processed foods, what they do is, and the reason why they're a big issue is because they create things that are highly palatable, right? They're very enticing, right? And they're very addicting. Now, for a lot of people are like, food, it's food, right? But food addiction is very real. It is a recognized form of addiction at this point, right? There is a Yale food addiction scale, which clinicians, nutritionists, and physicians we often use in people that are quite literally addicted to their food, right? And they'll have similar withdrawal effects if they don't get a certain kind of food or if they don't get food, their processed food. And this is linked to ultra processed food specifically, right? So why are they addicting? Right now, the main reason they're addicting is because when they extract the components of natural food, they strip them down and they put them back together in the most pleasurable ingredients. So, for example, if we take a fruit, right, a fruit has sugar in it, but it also comes with a lot of fiber, right? It has a certain flavor to it, right? If I eat an orange, even in the same batch from the same tree, they're all going to taste different. One's going to be sweet, one's not going to be that sweet. They're all going to have a different taste to it. But what the processed food industry does is when they strip them down, they put them back together so that the taste always remains the same. And they put and usually the combination is of fat, sugar, salt in very high concentration. What that does is that the fat activates the sensory areas where the mouthfeel is experienced, right? The sugar activates the reward system in the brain. Not very different to heroin and cocaine, like the other addictive substances. And this has been shown in studies after studies that high processed food that have a high sugar content, whether that's artificial or derived real processed sugar, they all activate the reward mechanism in the brain, the hedonic system in the brain. Right, so that's why they're very addicting, and they're very made very palatable because they want people to they want people to get hooked on them. Right now, the other reason why they're an issue is because they're very calorically dense. Right, once you put industrial fats and refined sugars together, the foods become very calorically dense, and this is one of the main reasons why they're linked to most chronic illnesses. Now, talking about ingredients, the ingredient list that's 10, 12, 15, 20 items long, most often they have no nutritional value. These ingredients, processed foods, are always nutrient deficient. And to make up for that nutrient deficiency, because in the process of taking food apart and stripping them down, all the nutrients are lost. So when it is the fiber that holds all the nutrients together, and when they take it apart, most of the nutrition is lost, right? So almost all the ultra processed food always makes some sort of health claim, right? They always say will help lower heart disease, or will help build strong bones, or will help with a strong immune system, because those are artificially added back, right? So that natural vitamin C is extracted, but then it's artificially processed vitamin C is added, right? Or certain oils are added for, vitamin D is added, and the health claim about the strong bones are made, right? So the poor ingredients are, number one, they're nutritionally deficient, so they lack in micronutrients. Then that's the second, is that they use industrial oils. The industrial oils are probably the second most dangerous after the refined sugars, in terms of being linked to chronic illnesses. And what are those industrial oils? Now, this is important. If people can memorize this, they can they can get really healthy if they can avoid just these 8 industrial oils. These are sunflower oil, canola oil, safflower oil, corn, soybean, cottonseed, grapeseed, and rice bran. Right? These are oils that are heavily used in the processed food industry. Right? And they're linked to every chronic illness out there. Then combine that with refined sugars, high fructose corn syrup, and over 200 different formulations of sugars that are used in the processed food industry. That combination is extremely deadly, and which is the main reason why ultra processed foods are causing such a havoc in our in the healthcare of nowadays. Now, and lastly, they're just using dangerous ingredients, right? Because the one of the purpose is to make one of the aims is to make cheap food, affordable food, and so there's very heavy use of pesticides in the processed food industry, right? There is glyphosate, which is a known carcinogen, and this was 800 million kilograms were sprayed worldwide. Another one, atrazine, is a herbicide, is a known teratogen. The way they're able to skirt this is because the FDA and other regulatory agencies around the world usually control the amount. So different countries have a different upper limit of these pesticides and herbicides that are can be used, and if they're below that level, they're allowed to be used on food, right? Or they're allowed to be sold in the supermarkets. Unfortunately, in the United States has the highest upper limit compared to many countries have outright banned them, glyphosate and atrazine, but unfortunately still to this day in the United States they're heavily used. Then flavor enhancers. There are different kinds, such as diacetyl, which is heavily used in the microwavable popcorn that people tend to enjoy a lot. It is a known liver and lung toxin, right? Potassium bromate, heavily used in the baking industry for all these Wonder Bread and those type of bread. It was banned in the UK, Canada, and the European Union, but unfortunately continues to be used in the US, right? Then natural flavors. Now, we see this a lot in the supermarkets, right? Oh, naturally flavored with with natural flavors, or no, or artificial flavors are added. These literally could be anything, right? The way the FDA doesn't regulate it is that if they don't cause acute toxicity, they can be used in the food. Meaning, if you're not going to keel over and die, or if you're not going to just like eat it and just fall over and die, they're allowed to use it. They don't monitor chronic toxicity, right? They only monitor acute toxicity, which is why they're allowed to be used in foods. And then again, preservatives such as BHA and BHT. Again, these are also known to be very bad for health. Trans fats, which were banned in most parts of the world, especially the Europe, but in the US they can still use it, but a certain quantity is still allowed. And sugar. Again, sugar is not only used as a flavor enhancer, but is also used as a preservative, right? Okay, so uh, now, why is this an issue? Other than the fact that it has all the pesticides, it has all these dangerous things, that it's addicting and it's poor for health. Um, Unfortunately, they're so pervasive that 60% of our calories nowadays, 60% are coming from ultra processed foods. And that's not just some of us, that's majority of the people nowadays. 60% of our calories are coming in ultra processed foods. And that's especially dangerous to children, right? Because they're linked to obesity, type 2 diabetes, cancer, heart disease, stroke, dementia, depression, all of them, all of them. And now, this in and of itself is a cause for alarm, and really should make us pause and think about the food that we eat, right? Now, a lot of people are like, okay, is that even known? Like, has that been studied? Yes, it has been. Now, this is a meta-analysis in a systematic review. What this does, this is a kind of study where they compare all the many different studies that have done, and they pool their data together. When they pool their data together, they can find trends in the data, right? And as you can see, all those boxes on the right side, that means that they're positively associated with what? So ultra processed foods are linked to a very strong association with obesity, overweight, depression, heart attacks, cardiovascular disease, strokes, and pretty much all causes of mortality. Meaning, if you're eating ultra processed food, you're going to die sooner, right? That's what it really means. Like any cause of mortality, the risk increases with ultra processed food. Okay, now ultra processed food in children. Children are most susceptible to ultra processed food. Why? Because they are the primary targets of ultra processed food. Look at any if we just take a tour of any grocery store, you'll find most of these food boxes are packaged in very colorful, very enticing packaging, right? Think of cereal boxes, for example, right? 100% artificial, 100% processed, but the people, kids have a connection with their cereal boxes, right? They'll get up in the morning, pour a box of cereal, then just look at, they have all these crossword puzzles and stories and jokes and all these things for kids to interact with their cereal box, out of all things, right? So they're targeting these children, right? With putting colors and flavorings, etc. Now, as I mentioned, there's significant time and marketing dollars spent just to attract children, right? And start very, very young. They're adding sugar in formula, in baby food, right? These are entirely ultra processed foods. Baby food and baby formula, 100% processed food, right? And as much as I mentioned before, 60% of our children's calories and adult calories are coming in the form of ultra processed foods, and these are even higher in underserved populations. And the reason why they're problematic is because they affect children negatively down to a cellular level, right? So they've followed children that have had a high ultra processed food intake as children, and they followed them as adults. They have the risk of all the chronic illness significantly earlier in life, right? So you'll have parents that are that are lean, that are healthy, that have not a significant history of being overweight, but then we have children that are overweight and they're significantly larger than their parents, right? That's a lot of that can be attributed to the ultra processed food and the processed food diet that the children are now on, right? And again, talking about why they're a big issue, because there's been many studies done. The reduction, as I mentioned, in main nutrients in the food, right? So kids are overfed, or people are overfed, but they're undernourished, right? Pretty much majority of the population have some sort of mineral deficiency, has some sort of vitamin deficiency. I mean, I can attest to the fact that majority of the patients I have, almost all of them are vitamin D deficient, right? Because people are not eating natural foods. People are not eating vitamin or fatty foods, or such as things like fatty fish, or the eggs they use are factory grown and industrially raised, right? So it's really, really an endemic problem, right? Now, the other another main issue is these diets are softer, right? Children are given, or even adults, are very soft food and more liquid food. That does two things. Number one, it allows people to eat a lot more of it, and therefore, a lot more calories are consumed. And number two, it leads to very, very poor dental health, right? People's jaws, they've done studies where over in the past 2 or 3 decades, people's jaws have been changing just because of the type of diet we're eating. We're not chewing our food, right? Kids as young as 2, 3 years old are still on a liquid or porridge or very soft diet, right? That has never been the case, right? And dental caries is on the rise, jaws, sleep apnea, all these issues are related to the processed food industry, right? Then another thing is low satiety, right? You eat these foods, but they're not satiating, right? Think of the time when you ate an avocado. After a single avocado, you're not able to eat another avocado, right? It's very difficult to eat one more avocado. But think of it like an Oreo, right? Oreo cookies, you can go through a lot of Oreo cookies. You can go through a lot of a bag of chips. You can go through a lot of bag of chips, right? The other thing is low thermic effect. So we eat food and then we burn food. But with the ultra processed food, because they're natural foods, have a high thermic effect, meaning they increase your metabolism, you're going to burn a lot of it. But these foods, ultra processed foods, they suppress your metabolism. So what ends up happening is that you're eating a lot more, meaning taking in a lot of calories, but it also slows down your metabolism, so you're not burning as much, right? And again, as I mentioned, they're highly palatable, which is very, very difficult, which is very problematic for children, right? And one of the viewer pointed out perfectly is that this is an issue with children, right? Because once they're hooked on these ultra processed foods, they're habit forming. It's very, very difficult to wean them off, right? And lastly, they're very pro-inflammatory, just because of the ingredients used in these foods, such as the industrial processed oils and the refined sugars, they are very pro-inflammatory and they affect our gut similarly. Okay, so this is an example. This here we have the annual retail sales of ultra-processed food and drinks in 80 countries. And as always, America is leading the charge with 308 kilograms per person is the annual consumption of ultra-processed food in America. Now, this data I think is from I think 5 or 7 years ago, and it has rapidly shifted to the right, and the sales have only increased. They've not decreased. A New York Times did an excellent expose in how these ultra processed food industries they specifically target underserved areas first, because and they show through marketing campaigns and through quote unquote educational campaigns, they convince people that the diets that they're eating or consuming are somehow unhealthy or are somehow lacking in vitamins and minerals that only their foods can provide. Which is why you see a lot of like if you go into underserved areas, people are always asking about, are my kids vitamin deficient, right? Because that is targeted campaigns by these companies done to convince these people that that their food, their natural foods, are somehow deficient in important vitamins and minerals, when we know that that is not the case, right? Okay, so moving forward, how do we what do we do, right? So I come up with these 3 R's, which is number one, recognizing, right? Recognizing the ultra processed food and the pervasiveness of ultra processed foods in our daily diet. Then once recognized, we can reduce the burden of of these UPFs in our diet. Reducing, ideally eliminating the need and the amount of or UPFs entirely from our diet, and replacing UPFs with real food, with real natural foods. So those are the 3 ways that we can do that. So number one is, how do we recognize it, right? So a good a helpful way is to know these harmful 7, right? These harmful 7, and if you want even a shorter list than that, then out of these 7, the 4 are these trans fats and hydrogenated oils. Number 2 is high fructose corn syrup. Number 3 is hormones and antibiotics, and number 3 is sweeteners, bleach flour. That would be the 4. Refined flour. Those are the 4 if you want to remember. And if you want to remember the 7, then these are the 7. Trans fats, high fructose corn syrup, hormones, antibiotics, artificial sweeteners, artificial colors, preservatives, and bleach flour. Okay, now this here is an example of all the different names the industry uses for sugar, or some formulation of sugar that they use. What's interesting is that they're only supposed to report, and when you leave the ingredient list and you see some of them, 5 of them, they're only supposed to report the ones that hit a certain level, and then they're supposed to include in the ingredient list. Say, for example, if they're only using a small amount, then they don't even have to report it. And that was found in that was done by some excellent research done at UCSF, where they compared where they took baby food and baby formula, and they did an analysis on that, and then based the amount that the food industry or these food industries were reporting sugars, when it was found that it had significantly higher amount of sugar than what was being reported. And that was when they found out that it was because that they had all these other forms of processed sugars that they were using in their food, right? And again, this graphic only shows some. There's over 200 different formulations of sugar. Okay, then they make these dubious marketing claims that we also have to be very aware of, right? For example, these blueberry Cheerios, right? They don't have any actual blueberries. They have 10 grams, which is about 2.5 teaspoons of added sugar per serving. They have 3 different added sugars. They charge you more because they make a health claim. And blueberry puree is just basically liquid sugar, right? Okay, so what are the recommendations for added sugar, right? Because we see them so much in foods, and especially kids, children's food, right? So from age 0 to 2, there's none. There should be kids should not be having kids 0 to 2 should not be having any added sugar in their diet. What I mean by that is that, can they have fruits? Yes, they can have a fruit, but they can't have any fruit juice, right? They can't have anything that you add sugar to, right? That's not what they're supposed to do, right? Anything that's naturally occurring sugar, they can have, right? Now, age 2 to 16, that's 3 teaspoons to 7 teaspoons only of added sugar. Anything more than that, is the upper limit is 7, right? And then even beyond that, I would say 7 to 10 teaspoons, that's the upper limit. Um, but what is happening is that, right? That our drinks and our very commonly consumed beverages have ridiculous amount of added sugar. For example, Coca-Cola has about 15. Fruit juice have 17. Now, here I would like to also add that a lot of people are like, "Hey, I'm not drinking Coke. I'm drinking fruit juice." Right? As a matter of fact, if you were given a choice metabolically to drink Coca-Cola or any soda versus fruit juice, you should pick soda, because that's quote unquote healthier, and I would say less damaging than fruit juice, right? Because it's very commonly understood that, oh, because it's fruit, it's coming from natural, and it's going to be healthier than Coca-Cola. Far from it, right? Primarily because fruit juice has a very high concentration of fructose. Fructose can only be metabolized by the liver, right? While Coca-Cola has more of the sucrose sugar, which can be metabolized by any cell in the body, right? So when you're drinking fruit juice, or you're giving your kids a lot of fruit juice, you're putting in an exorbitant, or a very high demand on their liver, which can cause non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or just fatty liver disease. So we have to really understand how much sugar or added sugar are in these drinks. Okay, again, baby foods, right? Commonly baby foods. Remember, I said 0 to 2 years old, they shouldn't have any added sugar. But what do we see here, right? In most of these have at least 2 to 3 teaspoons in one of these bags, right? And now kids usually go through, I don't know, 2 or 3 of these things in a day. So they have already well outside their daily limit, or I would say weekly limit in a day, right? Okay. Then, we have all these artificial breakfast formulations, such as chocolate milk, or honey bunches of oats, or these breakfast biscuits, or even just bread, or processed bread and jam. Right? We see that they have, anywhere from 3 to 5 teaspoons of added sugar, and that's not including the sugar that's already contained in them. Right? It's 3 teaspoons of added sugar plus another 3 to 5 teaspoons of sugar that's already in it. So you're starting your day with, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 teaspoons of sugar, of artificially processed sugar, which is a problem. Okay, again, we see here Enfamil, products that contain maltodextrin, which is a type of sugar. I don't know why cup noodles or taco seasoning need sugar, but that's what they do, right? They add, again, as I mentioned, ultra processing involves a combination of fats, salt, and sugar, which are highly palatable to the brain, even though you may not feel it in the sense that taste it, but the biochemical effect is that they're targeting specific neural pathways, if you want to call it, just so that you keep coming back for that taste, that flavor, that feeling that you ate that food, right? Okay. Again, some usual, common lunches that people pack for their children. These artificially flavored yogurts, or quote unquote fruit snacks, or fruit juices, right? These have a very, very high level of added refined sugars, food colorings, preservatives. For yogurt, always remember, if it doesn't have live cultures in it, it's trash. I mean, you might as well just throw it away, because live cultures are never going to be found in anything that's not severely or heavily processed. It just doesn't survive in it. Okay. How does it affect children or adults for that matter? That can be a graphic for adults as well. It affects their brain. So people that are on a high processed food diet, they have smaller brains. They have later brain development, right? 80% of your brain develops by the age of 5, right? So if kids by the age of 5 are fed that high in sugar, guaranteed they're going to have smaller brains, right? Teeth, dental caries, high degree of asthma, fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes in the pancreas, reproductive organs such as polycystic ovarian syndrome, gout in the joints, body fat like obesity, cardiovascular disease, we all know, hypertension, diabetes, dyslipidemias, all these things, right? They're linked to processed food, industrial oils, refined sugars, refined flours. Okay, again, just to iterate, these harmful 7, if we can identify them, know them, and try to remove them from our diet, it's going to go a long way just cleaning up our diet. Trans fats and hydrogenated oils, which were the 8, the sunflower oil, corn oil, etc., high fructose corn syrup, hormones and antibiotics, processed and artificial sweeteners, artificial colors, preservatives, bleach flour. Okay, now lastly, I talk about replacing and swapping, right? So, what do we do here? We eat real fruits. We don't do fruit juices. We don't do, these smoothies, these shakes that they prepackaged ones that they sell. Eggs, if you're getting eggs, get pasture raised eggs, organic, cage free. These are all just gimmicky names for the same thing. They have to be pasture raised if you want to derive benefit from your food, and you don't want to fall in that nutritionism, meaning I'm eating eggs for protein. That's fine, you can eat whatever eggs, but if you want to gain good health from eggs, then they have to be pasture raised eggs, right? Again, nuts. um, don't eat granola bars, eat actual natural nuts. Don't eat honey roasted nuts, eat nuts, right? uh, Meats. If you're eating meats, understand and eat. Understand the benefit of eating nose to tail. Now, a lot of people turn their nose against it. Again, these are all messages that we've come across that we've to eat that we can't eat organ meats, that liver or things that have a high amount of fat are looked down upon. Understand that most of the nutrients are locked in there. So if you're eating not for nutritionism, not if you're eating for I just want to get my protein in, you can eat whatever you want. But if you want good health from the meat that you eat, it has to be whole meat. It has to be an animal that was raised properly. It was animal that treated properly. It was not fed junk. It was not fed soy and corn and raised. It has to be pasture raised. Again, if you're eating oatmeal, then it has to be unprocessed. It can't be microwave oatmeal. It can't be quick oatmeal. Same thing with bread, right? Avoid any bread that has more than 3 ingredients, right? Get natural bread, right? It's going to be harder, right? But that's the whole point. It's going to go bad quicker, but that's the whole point of natural food. It's not supposed to last you 2 weeks or 3 weeks, right? Then one good method of knowing if you're going to a supermarket is you shop the perimeter. The perimeter of any supermarket is always going to have natural food. Think about it. Vegetables, fruits, dairy, cheese, milk, all these things are on the perimeter. In the middle is all filled with garbage, ultra processed foods. Okay. Now, some of the things again, just to highlight of how they will get you. For example, this Outshine is a very famous brand. You'll find them in very boutique grocery stores. It says no sugar added. It's no sugar added, but it has sorbitol, maltodextrin, grape juice, concentrate, polydextrose, sucralose, strawberry juice, and yeah, acesulfame potassium. These are all forms of sugar. So they're able to get around this sugar because they've renamed sugar in so many different names that they're able to write whatever they want to write, right? Instead, make your own fruit pops at home. They're very, very, very easy to make. Snack swaps. Again, granola bars loaded with sugar, flavored yogurts loaded with sugar, all those fruit roll-ups, graham crackers, swap them to bites that you can make them yourself. Plain yogurt, put some fruit in it. Real fruit, put some nuts and stuff in it. Again, there's some swaps from outside smoothies. Make your own at home, right? From outside beverages and sodas. You can have kombucha, you can have teas, you can have fruit infused waters. Um, and one of the main things is hydrogenated oils. Swap them for animal fats, such as butter, such as ghee, such as beef tallow. And if you want plant-based ones, the three main ones that you can use are avocado oil, palm oil, and olive oil. Now, those are the three plant-based oils that you can use. And I think that's it for today. If anybody has any questions, I know we have a little bit of time left, so we can take some questions. All right. I hope that was beneficial. My throat's all dry, but all right. So let's take. There's a comment here. It's an issue for children because it alters their palate to prefer the ultra processed food. It becomes that much harder to get children to eat whole food. Exactly, right? Okay. And then what about homemade fruit juices without added sugar? Those are fine, but my contention would be to just eat the fruit. While if you must have a fruit, that's fine. You make homemade fruit without added sugar. But do understand that a lot of the beneficial or health effects of fruits are there because of the fiber that's contained in the fruit, right? So um, think of an orange, right? If you freeze an orange, it completely degrades, right? It's not like you can thaw an orange and eat it again, right? Because it has both soluble and insoluble fiber in it, right? What happens is when you freeze it, that fiber gets destroyed. Similarly, when you're making fruit juice at home and you're putting it in whatever blender you have, you're destroying all that fiber, right? So when you destroy all that fiber, what happens is that when you eat that or when you drink that juice, it's gonna spike your blood sugar really quickly, and that's just not healthy. So you're increasing the glycemic index, which is the rate at which the sugar is absorbed in your body, all that much faster. So if you must, that's fine. Squeeze the juice somehow or do it less, but I wouldn't make a habit out of it. Okay. Okay, let me see if anybody has any questions here. What types of carbs to eat? Okay, we have another question. What type of carbs to eat? Again, you can eat any sort, so again, what I started this, no macronutrients are bad, right? There's if you eat carbohydrates, if you eat proteins, if you eat, none of them are inherently bad, right? It depends on like what two things. Number one, your health, right? If you're a diabetic, right, then yes, you have to reduce the carbohydrate as much as possible. You don't have a choice. You're at a point where your body carbohydrates are toxic to your body, right? So that's a difference. But if you're talking about if you're quote unquote healthy, you don't have any medical problems, and you just want to clean up your diet, then you can eat any sort of carbohydrate so long as that is not processed, right? So that includes fruits, vegetables, um, you know, any carbohydrate that's not processed, I would say. Okay, great information. What do you recommend as a quick breakfast? I ask because normally I usually have a microwavable oatmeal, which I see isn't good for me. Yes. Okay. So when you say a quick breakfast, um, a good question. Now, that this touches upon two things, right? Number one is that your relationship with food, and number two is when you mean quick, what is quick, right? Because 10 minutes, like you can eat a boiled egg very quickly, right? You can eat eggs in general or very quickly. You can make an egg sandwich with sourdough bread that's very minimal, that's not processed at all, right? So those are a good example of, or you can have a banana, or you can have a fruit. Like those are examples of very quick breakfast that are completely unprocessed, right? Um, So or just plain yogurt with berries, right? Or you can do oats overnight, right? Oats overnight, or get regular oatmeal. No, not when I say unprocessed oatmeal, and put them overnight with berries. Put them overnight with a little bit of whole milk, minimally processed as possible. And then in the morning, you'll have oatmeal ready. You just take it to go. So that's as quick as possible. Yep, overnight oatmeal can be made the night before, exactly. Uh, so you can have, I mean, chai is fine, but what you have in chai depends. Look at the ingredient list of whatever you're eating it with, and if the ingredient list, again, it has, I mean, the most of the rusks that you eat with chai are made with heavy use of industrial oil. So I would avoid them actually, unless you know where they're making them. Some of them do use butter as well, if you can get them freshly made. But if you can't, then I would avoid them. All right. What's the best oil to use? The next one. What's the best oil to use? So there is no quote unquote best oil. It depends on what you're making, and what you're using it for, right? So if you're eating a salad, and if you're eating a salad and you want to drizzle oil in it, use olive oil. I would say that would probably be the best oil for that purpose. But if you were frying something, or if you're sautéing something, then you can use animal fat, such as butter, such as ghee, such as beef tallow, or you could use avocado oil, because those have a higher smoke point. Yeah, or palm oil. Palm oil also another option to use for cooking at high heat. And would you say canned tuna is processed? Again, we don't have an issue with processed. It's the ultra processed, right? So it can be minimally processed. It could be just cut up and stored in water or olive oil. So that's not processed, right? But you also have to understand where the tuna is coming from. Is it farm raised tuna? It is, or is it fresh caught tuna, right? So it depends on uh, what kind of tuna it was, because farm raised tuna have a very high use of both antibiotics, and they're fed the same thing as they feed, I don't know, cows and pigs, corn oil. Sorry, corn. Okay, I think that completes our hour, and I think everybody, if anybody has any last questions, we can answer them. Otherwise, we can close today's webinar. Some say palm oil is controversial. No, actually, palm oil. Yeah, palm oil. The controversy regarding palm oil was started when they were being phased out. So initially, there was very yes, you're right, because the sorry, another thing somebody said, palm oil is controversial because they have a very high saturated fat content. I think that's what you mean. I mean, oils are fat, so they're going to have a fat content. Uh, so palm oil was controversial, but only controversial because of that reason, is because erroneous reason that they said it's a high in saturated fats. We know that healthy, natural saturated fats are not bad for health. They're just not, right? So saturated fats, so palm oil is a healthy fat that can be used for cooking, similar to avocado oil. Um, Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. for joining us. And yeah, if you have any questions, comments, you can always email us as well. And then hopefully see you in the next one.